Our first speaker this morning is our president, who's been involved in ELF research for a long time. He's going to present psychotronics, radionics, and historical overview. I'd like you to welcome Bob Beck.
Okay, good morning. I guess you've all had these experiences during your lifetime, but at breakfast we had Dennis and Nell and Ed Skilling, and we were reminiscing over the last 30 or 40 years that we have spent in this crazy endeavor and wondering what kept us going. But some of these marvelous devices are being recycled right now today. The presentation in the film strip format was made for a day-long seminar where people could have hands-on experience with some of these tools, get an idea in actuality what they can and can't do. But since we have 45 minutes, we're going to skip through a great deal of this to allow some time for interaction, because I learn more from you than you learn from me. So I think if we can kill as many lights as possible, we'll just simply launch. And since this is a non-union production, I might have to stay down there and nurse that little film strip projector. We're going to have to kill that spotlight because it's going to totally wipe out the slides. And if you don't see me in the TV camera, that's just fine, because I've never won a beauty contest in my life, and the slides are a lot more interesting. So let's look at where we began and where we came from and where we might be going. And this is our standard disclaimer. Remember, an expert is someone who may not know any more about it than you do, but he has it organized and uses slides. This time it's film strips, because they're a lot cheaper to carry around on the airplane than these rolls and rolls of slides. I guess I'm like this man who was one of the casualties in San Diego in the earthquake last week. It took 11 hours to dig him out because he was a book collector, and all these books fell down on him. How many of you saw that photograph in the newspaper? Join the club. We had literally bookshelves of books on the early and current state-of-the-art in psychotronics and radionics. And these go back about 40 or 45 years. These are all different. And since most of these are old history, of course, dowsing and radionics come together, because in my opinion, radionics, psychotronics, has to be a function of the mind, as is dowsing. We don't see as much in the instruments as we do in the consciousness of the person who's using them. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with some of these books that span back to the 1920s. We normally talk about the philosophical approach of each of these authors, but we're not going to do that today, except I imagine everyone in here is familiar with the work of Hans Nieper of Germany, who believes that the geopathogenic zones are a primary cause of cancer and other illnesses. Now, a great deal is to be said for this. We've collected any number of devices in my garage, my museum, that are primarily intended to alter these earth emanations. And I was amazed to find that some of these go back about 3,000 years to the ancient Chaldeans, to the Africans who blessed their fields with little stakes that were driven into the ground. I believe, at least in our generations, that Albert Abrams was the father of radionics as we know it today. And these books have been reprinted. Can you see this stuff in the back row?
Bob, could you get the microphone on you?
Bob?
Yes?
Get the microphone on you.
All right, will do. That's probably my breath noise. I'm still... Okay, thank you. He began by percussing the stomach of a healthy person while the input to the device was held on the forehead. He later substituted the rub plate or the stick plate for this rather primitive stick plate that required a human being in the circuit. Could be a little bit tedious. We know people today, Valdera Lord in Los Angeles, that had been used by Abrams as a stick plate. She would bare her midriff, and Abrams would rub this in his diagnostic work back in about 1922. So some of these people are still alive. We wish they would write their books. But this is what one of the Abrams devices looked like, treating these people. We found several of these in estate sales and auctions. They're in my collection. Another early Abrams device. And there were basically nothing but decade resistance boxes. Oh, we're a little too high on this. And in his books, which I'm sure all of you have seen, they show the general schematic outline of the units. Later, inductances replaced the resistance elements in some of the approaches. And then in the late 1920s and early 1930s, he began using vacuum tube amplifiers to enhance what he felt was the electronic medicine effect. I have several of these boxes, and we're donating them to either Peter Kelly's museum or the Bakken Museum, because my house is being redeveloped for the Community Redevelopment Agency in Hollywood, and I've got to move out a 30-year collection of toys. But here's what it looks like. I think our dear friend and teacher Galen Hieronymus had a couple of these at our convention several years ago. But they're fascinating devices. They were built with a great deal of care. This was the bifilar wound resistances. You can see the little resistance elements on the left, which looked like hairpin elements of nichrome wire. And then for the higher resistances, of course, it required more and more and more wire. There was a flashlight battery that ran a little light bulb in the well, and it was a primitive form of color therapy before the Pathoclast unit was developed by Dr. Wigglesworth shortly after this era. The 1945 version, just about the end of World War II, was using a solenoid-type interrupter that was pulsing the energy going to the human subject. Now, of course, Ed Skilling here has a far updated and more effective device using solid-state electronics, but these were the schematics of a number of the early radionics, radiesthesia, diagnostic and treatment devices. Now, I would like to do something which I'm sure you will have to adopt eventually. I'm going to say that this dissemination is the opinion of the speaker, and not necessarily an endorsement of any particular system, that we're here under our constitutionally guaranteed First Amendment rights. This is not intended as the diagnostic or treatment of any human disease. See your doctor and die early. Okay? I learned that from my friend Walter Groats. The FDA's been pounding on his door too. I guess it's a great compliment. When you're doing anything that's significant, Big Brother is going to visit you early on. Rate books. The shortwave oscilloclasts, they sometimes used to boil the bases off of these Fleming valves and vacuum tubes to get them up, and they were putting out signals up to around 20 or 30 megahertz, which was darn good for the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. He had many, many imitators. Over the years, we've collected a number of these instruments that were just very cheap rip-offs of the original Abrams oscilloclast. Here are some of them that were made in San Francisco. This one is particularly amusing because all it was little helix of coat hanger type wire into which a circular piece of coat hanger was operated by the dials on the panels. Now, how this could possibly have any effect is beyond me, but people paid good money for treatment on these, and truly it is in the mind. These are very high-class amulets and talismans, and if the person believed he would get better, naturally he would. And we heard from our dear friend Dennis Stillings in the back, who knows far more about this than I do, that the chairman of the board of directors, the CEO of the Medtronics Corporation that sells about $1 billion a year worth of implantable heart pacers, one of the biggest industries in Minneapolis, is really busting the medical doctors by saying, hey, you guys that are doing double-blind experiments are missing the point. What if the mind itself is an essential ingredient in the process, and you're cutting them off from the major ingredient? Now, I go along with that, and I think Earl certainly deserves some accolades for what he's trying to point out. We have got to come back to the point that our consciousness, our spirit, our high self is really running the show, that we're not just a piece of meat. But at any rate, a number of these instruments seem to prove the fact that it doesn't matter what's in the box. If it's a placebo, talisman, or amulet, what does it matter? Except some of the modern machines go way beyond this. Of course, the heroine of our modern age was Dr. Ruth Drown, and I've had many a tour, as has Ed Skilling, through her little laboratory when she was in Hollywood, California. She is a very rare photograph of Dr. Drown taken by Jay Arman of Life magazine at the time she was being investigated by the district attorney's office, John Minor, in California. This was her desk-type radionics instrument. He smuggled a camera into her lab and shot this photograph. And here is the device that she used to heal literally thousands of apparently incurable patients up until the time of her final arrest around the middle 1960s. This was her radiovision instrument in which she could allegedly take psychic x-rays of persons using nothing but a blood sample or a witness. Of course, the surviving state-of-the-art is in the hands of Marcel Vogel in San Francisco, who has the original Delaware camera from George Delaware, which operated as long as Watson was running the film. This is a portable Ruth Drown type radionics instrument. Many laboratories, this one happened to be in Van Nuys, California, had any number of these instruments operational 24 hours a day. People from all over the world would send in blood samples, and for a monthly fee, usually $15 to $20, this was pre-inflation, would be diagnosed and treated at a distance no matter where they were in the world. And strangely enough, many of these got better at a faster rate than if they had been treated as a piece of meat by their local allopathic physician. One of her larger, both diagnostic and treatment boxes, I inherited this from my friend Dr. Tom Mason. What's inside? Practically nothing. Some dead, shorted switch elements. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them at the top. And all they did was keep score of where the dials had been set on the outside of the box. Truly, it is in the mind. Ruth Drown was working with electromagnetic fields long before it became popular. And in her little place on Gardner, and then later on La Brea Avenue in Hollywood, not too far from where I live, sometimes patients would be slid into this huge coil, this huge solenoid, which was activated off of 60 hertz AC. Strangely enough, she found that it worked just as well when the power was off, again, indicating that this is a placebo and in the mind. Had she, of course, explored certain specific frequencies, as is being done today, we would have come up with much more dramatic projects. Now, this report had been quite an embarrassment to the Allopathic Medical Society, because back in the 40s, the California Society of Chiropractic Radionic Research ran tightly controlled, double-blind experiments on guinea pigs. Now, guinea pigs are not very hypnotizable, as far as I can tell, and the controls and the subjects showed this remarkable spread, indicating that something was going on here in the holographic mind, or the morphogenetic fields of life, that was beyond the ken of the physicists, chemists, and engineers. This report, which was totally truthful, completely outraged the academia because it showed that a great deal more was going on for which could be accounted in their system. Now, in June of 1956, John Campbell, God bless him, because I was a science fiction buff from a very early age, in the Astounding Science Fiction June 1956, began looking into psionic machines. He was assisted by T. Galen Hieronymus, who is the dean of our current generation, who diagrammed from his original patent his alloptic energy detector, which would work with people who had a dowsing reflex. And this is the John Campbell shielded tube version of the original alloptic energy detector, which basically put something through a slit, that's something going through a prism, and then that something was picked up by a little movable pickup, went into what appeared to be a common amplifier, commonly understood amplifier, and there we are. But he also found, by the way, this is a circuit diagram of the original Hieronymus amplifier that was used to detect this alloptic energy. And photographs from 1956, Astounding Science Fiction, showing how John Campbell, using a lot of his friends, began investigating Hieronymus's claims. Here you can see the rotating prism, the detector, and the transmitter. The rotating prism is this little device on the left, or rather the rotating pickup. The prism is here, and the transmitter here. Now we know that no physical energy was being transmitted, picked up, transduced, and amplified by such a system, and it still worked. At that time, there was this tremendous conflict between our mystics and our scientists, and of course we're on a collision course now. All of the scientists that I know today want to be magicians, and all the magicians think they're scientists. So, and by 1957, since Astounding Science Fiction was read by all of us boy scientists, kept us balanced, the mail was pouring in on this unprovable speculation, so John Campbell made the definitive experiment, which totally outrages all of us in the field. He built this marvelous little black box, and you can see the control knob, the stick plate, where you put the specimens, and all that was inside was a drawing, a diagram of this instrument drawn in India ink on a piece of Bristol paper, and it worked just as well as the one that had vacuum tubes, resistors, was following a conventional, for that day, electronic technology. But what he found is if he broke a single line on this drawing, it wouldn't work anymore. He had violated the intention of the system, whatever that might be. And then the letters really started piling in. You can see on the left here, the coil wasn't really a coil. It was just India ink on a piece of paper. And you can see the input, the rotating prism, and the output, and a schematic diagram of an amplifier. Totally outrageous. Well, John Campbell was, he actually delighted in doing things of this sort. And there it is. So a lot of people were selling Hieronymus machines, and you'd send in your $5 and you would get back this piece of paper with the ink on it. And by that time, very few people wanted to hook it up and see whether it worked or not. They were outraged. It had offended their own reality structure, so that was the end of the line, until recently. Now, some marvelous devices are being made in Great Britain, or were. The Kopin, the Delaware, Malcolm Ray. I have all of these. A blood sample, as always, was placed on the witness plate. People who were used to using pendulums could use a pendulum. Others used the rub plate. They went down the book of rates. Radionics broadcaster, nothing inside. But you would set up the rates on it, and the people would get better. How many of you heard Dr. Roy Curtin yesterday? I think that was one of the most brilliant, incisive analysis of the situation that I have ever heard. I'd like to acknowledge that it's great to have someone in here with interdisciplinary reality that can make these things palatable to the rest of us. But anyway, here are a number of the boxes that were available in Great Britain. Another form of the helical spiral, My little portable Delaware instrument. Picked these up over the years. I hope I'm never raided. There was a time when the district attorney took axes and broke these up at the very sight of the users. We're going through this in a big hurry because this is pretty much old hat for most of you. This is the Delaware camera, which is wound up here with our friend and colleague Marcel Vogel. Now, the chap who was operating it and Watson later confessed that they had faked the information when they were working for George Delaware in England. I hate to tell you this, but sometimes they would carry a little flashlight, sometimes a little piece of radioactivity, radium. They would put the image on the film, which is why the rest of the people, George, etc., was never able to get results. But that didn't stop a lot of investigators. This particular thought form was in the system by now. And here's what it looked like inside, and Marcel has reported on this device at great length. This is one of the small drown treatment instruments. Of course, if it has a meter on it, people are more likely to believe it's doing something. All the meter did was test the integrity of the electrodes to see if any wires were broken. It had nothing to do with the human rate. Inside of it, again, the 9 little switches that went nowhere. They were soldered together with steel piano wire with acid core solder, which of course meant that after a few months the wires would corrode and drop off, and my mission in life is to repair and restore these. And in many doctors' offices in Los Angeles today, you'll find these devices with no connections whatsoever operating away perfectly. So it is in the mind, it is in the intention. Many of the rates, stick detectors, what's inside? Practically nothing. A plate, a piece of rubber, like in a rubber glove on the top, and a cavity that goes to the antenna output of the box. But if you do this, something in your mind will give the dowsing response, and you will get a reaction. It doesn't matter whether anything is inside of this $200 stick plate, rub plate, or not. So let's free ourselves from the fact that, or rather the illusion, that we're working with conventional science, physics, and electronics. Now, of course, for the old timers, no machine was necessary. The dowsing reflex, a photograph, some kind of a link to the subject was all that was necessary. And these little homeopathic remedies or bottles of no-sods were lined up, and the high self would tell through the muscle movement and reaction what that particular patient needed as an archetype for reestablishing the link with the healing energies within your own body. Many wild and wondrous pendulums were made with marvelous claims of efficacy that had nothing whatever to do with the number of turns of wire around the magnet. They had all to do with making the consciousness of the human being believe that he could do it. And I belong to a number of the little dowsing groups around Los Angeles. Here, of course, is the world-famous Cameron, or rather the prototypes of the Verne Cameron aurimeters, which evolved to a very, very sensitive device, counterbalanced with a spring, so that the slightest signal coming from your conscious mind to your muscles could be amplified, and you could see the movement of this device and get the message. In the Kahuna system, your middle self, or your conscious mind, will ask the low self, or the unconscious, to contact the high self, superconscious, God consciousness, spirit, whatever you choose to call it, bring the message back down to the subconscious, and somehow deliver it to your conscious mind. Well, these pendulums, dowsing devices, aurimeters, rub plates, are perfect examples of ways to bridge this communication gap between your high self, your low self, and your middle self, at least in that vernacular. And that's all they are. There's nothing magical about the fact that it has to be nickel-plated, copper, or aluminum handle that's chrome-plated with a brass bearing. Forget it. And of course, a very early form, the Ouija board. Ouija means yes, no, or no, yes. Hieronymus stands out among all of the deans of psychotronics by actually getting a U.S. patent on his device, number 3356964. And let's don't talk about this. It's a device which will train psychics by intersecting scalar waves. It's nothing but a 929 phototube, which has a gas cloud like a magnetron rotating, which is extremely sensitive to mental, electrical, electrostatic, magnetic, actinic, light. We've used these for about 20 years to train people for extraordinary talents. In case you're interested, the U.S. patent number, if you can't read this, you might want to get a copy of this and replicate the device, 3356964. December 8th, 1967, by Dr. Jan J.A.N. Forman, F-O-R-M-A-N. One of the geniuses. Read the number again. Radiant energy controlled oscillator, 3356964. Okay? We find that a very useful device for training your own mind to do things that it normally doesn't do unless you jog it along. This one we built in 1967. It's been loaned to a number of parapsychology labs. Tends to work. Now, when Joseph Goodovich published this landmark article about 1965, Magic Science of the Future, my interest in the Hieronymus phenomena was totally rekindled. And of course, it's come down to what we know today. We won't go into this, but here's the original Hieronymus patent. He got Canadian and British patents on the device, and they do heal people at a distance. This is only the opinion of the author. Don't come and arrest me. And of course, the classic patent. I got my hands on one of these that belongs to a local Los Angeles doctor back about 25 years ago. This is the genuine Hieronymus box made by the Radiation Research Laboratories in 1946 in Kansas City. Radiation Laboratories. It was built like a Swiss watch. This machine was about 25 or 30 years old when I first took it apart and cleaned it, checked it out, changed some of the vacuum tubes, which were totally burned out. And I was tremendously impressed with the care and the workmanship, the skill that had gone into the construction of it. And here it was. The genuine, well, step granddaddy of the whole field. I love taking these things apart, seeing what's inside. This was the father of the homeopathic potentizers. This is about 35 years old. Again, built like a Swiss watch. You can see here the little rotating prism in which the homeopathic radiation was scanned from the sample, superimpressed on distilled water or sugar pills. Here's the amplifier and a block diagram which has seen several generations of change of the original 3-bank Hieronymus device. And here was the amplifier, the preferred stick plate, the potentizer. So naturally, we began replicating these things about 25 years ago, and one of my students and colleagues, Robert Mosier, built some of these in Phoenix, and they finally trickled down to some of us who are in this very room today. We won't bore you with the detail. Okay, this one, well, let's not talk about it. This was one of the more elaborate devices. In those days, they felt that the more dials, the better. At least more dials would impress your superconscious mind that more was being done for you. Sometimes less is better. And in the back, nothing. Resistors which had fallen apart, wires that had corroded, etc. The fellow who built this no longer will even talk about them today. Some of the devices in our collection got very elaborate. This thing had perhaps 150 dials. Instead of the trays of homeopathic remedies, they had them built in. Most of the things to which a person could become allergic were in little capsules, little gelatin capsules: wheat, ragweed, pollen, cat's dander, fur, etc. Another one of the experimental laboratory devices with all the dials and knobs. You can do this with about 3 or 4 dials. But I found these things extremely interesting. This was a Ken Hunter treatment box. You would find these in most chiropractic offices. In the back, resistors, most of which had fallen apart over the last 30 or 40 years. But these are the great-great-grandfathers of some of the radionic devices you'll see at the meeting. Of course, you would find little crystal samples that were used instead of dials and boxes. This could go on and on and on, but we are not going to do that. The British people like pendulums. We like stick plates and other devices. Some of the heroes and pioneers of the field, some of their various devices. You can do all of this by using nothing but a measuring rule, like a yardstick, connected to a sample and a pendulum to go up and down to get a number. You don't need dials, faceplates, etc. One of the British equivalents of the Oscar Brunner biometer. I knew Oscar when he was still alive. He died back in the late 40s. Anything that will communicate information from your superconscious mind to your muscular response on something that your eye can see, whether it's a ruler, a dial, a scale, a pendulum chart, a protractor, and then back into your conscious mind where you can do something with this information. And they had elaborate rules, protocol for setting up these devices. They used magnets, they used radium, they used magnetized water. Here, a silk thread is connecting the device to the table full of nosodes. It's all in your mind. But like the psychic surgeons who pretend to get some tissue out of your body, until you see that piece of chicken or pig liver come out of you, you don't really believe that anything has been done. And the more elaborate these constructs, the more professional these little kits of witnesses, whether anything was in the bottles or not, the more striking your pendulum, the more faith you had engendered in the subject. Some of these devices were made out of nothing but cardboard, and you could slide these little rules in and out. And here, of course, was this magical geometrical form, which sort of gave you a concentration point. And this, boys and girls, was the original Beauvais biometer that was taken to this country by Oscar Brunner about the time of World War II. Some of the rather elaborate pendulum indicators, I particularly like the one right here that was Bill Finch from Arizona. He was one of my teachers. In India, this is the principal healing modality of many of the Hindu doctors. They have these percentage charts, color charts, biometric radiation, seat of the disease with the various organs and systems on them, condition, very ill, serious, dying, critical, hopeless, dead, bedridden, normal. Love them. If all of these books fall on me in the next earthquake, I will join my ancestors like King Tut, buried with all of these marvelous artifacts. Manner of death: asphyxiation, drowning, accident, burning, sudden, disease, insect bite, vaccination, suicide. Right! We'll have to add a few from our current. And here, of course, is Bill Finch's little pendulum chart, on which I learned a great deal, mainly that he could do it a lot better than I could. The original scale, worked out by radiation research laboratories of the Hieronymus device, and we passed out hundreds of these for people who would replicate them. This, by the way, was the original, we're changing the topic now, Lakowski multiple wave oscillator. I first encountered this device in 1962. During the course of a year, I must look at perhaps 100 of these marvelous healing modalities. 101 of which are totally worthless, and this one turned out to be the best thing of the decade. We published on it in '62 in the BSRA Journal, and by the way, Tom Brown and Allison are here with us today. And here's from the book, The Fields of Life by Lakowski, Cancers Before and After a Few Treatments. These actually worked. Before, after, before, after. Of course, they were counterfeited in Great Britain with little boxes. There are two of these here at the fair today that do absolutely nothing. A little light in the center flashes. There's no electrostatic charge that causes arcing between the rings. The original Lakowski device. Well, I'd better get past this because we got some interesting stuff to show you. Yeah?
Take a minute and tell them about your experience with the mobile wave oscillator in the hospital in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Maybe I'd better not. They work. We've taken these things in and we've smuggled them in and cured people who were about nearly dead, but here again I'm exposing myself to a tremendous amount of... some doctors in LA about 1940 had buried pipes in the ground to pick up the Earth radiation that was non-geopathogenic and transmit this energy to patients sitting in the clinic. They had all sorts of marvelous horse collars and wrist hooks and stimulators through which nothing at all was coming because many were connected with silk threads. These were the DOTTO, or D-O-T-T-O rings, in which cryogenic electromagnetic energy, cryogenic so that conductance would be high, resistivity low. And he was curing people with this device before he was run out of New Jersey. Here were the famous Eamon screens. Big Brother wants you, baby. Don't mess with this stuff unless you've got the right license. Crack down on quackery. A quack is caught after taking $500,000 from 35,000 patients. And here, of course, is the saga of Ruth Drown. The protagonist here was John Miner for the prosecution, Melvin Belli for the defense, and Dr. Drown, the worst picture I've ever seen of her, and John Miner, the absolute tyrant during the 1960s in the DA's office. Here is another friend of mine, Tony, when he was busted by Life magazine, and Ruth Drown being booked into Los Angeles County Jail, and her daughter, Cynthia Brown, who's now deceased. One of the killing devices was the Yukaco machine. It was used to destroy insects in fields hundreds of miles away. It was Yukaco, named after Curtis P. Upton, William Knuth, and Howard Armstrong. U-K-A, then C-O for company. And here is a surviving actual Yukaco device which had been used to kill human beings. One of these leaked from the Cortero Development Corporation in Arizona. The mafia got its hands on it, and as the story goes, they had put out contracts, $3,000 per death to dissolve a marriage, partnership, an enemy, and the payment wasn't made until the time of the signing of the death certificate, which was usually from stroke or some kind of a pulmonary inflammation that looked like flash pneumonia but was not assisted by antibiotics. I got involved with an investigation on this, and it got to be really hairy back in the 1970s. But there it is, the original Yukaco bug killer. And the schematic diagram, which Riley Crabb republished in the BSRA. How many of you believe in prayer, therapy, healing? If you believe in that, how about psychic affliction? You can't have one without the other. That's the bottom line. People don't like to look at this side of radionics, but here it is. William A. Tiller, PhD, got involved in the field, and at a conference pointed out that the correspondences correlated one-to-one with the chakra systems. We won't go through his rationale. This book, according to many, was a disinformation effort funded by the Soviet KGB. Okay, we're going to get through this in a hurry then, and we're going on to the things that we find more interesting. Let's just turn this off and go over to here, and I'll stay where I am. And Trevor James Constable in a modern generation Cloudbuster that really, really works. He has mounted these things in a car which he can drive down the freeway in conjunction with Irv Trent in Orange County and actually, repeat, actually control the weather. The pumps, plenum chambers, etc., are operated from the front seat. You can see the reservoirs in the back seat for the water that is recycled. And how about the nameplate on his car, Baron Frankenstein? And here we go down the freeway with the Cloudbusters aimed out the back of the car. Absolutely marvelous device being manufactured by my friend Peter Kelly. I won't talk about these particular rates. Another very interesting device coming out of Arizona, made by Bill Lawson. There might be some here if we're lucky at the show today. And my friend Pete Peterson showing how they operate. They're programmable from a tape recorder. Pete, I broke down and bought 3 of the computers so I wouldn't have to reprogram those mothers from the tape recorder every time. I've been playing with one of these for a couple of weeks. The jury is still out. All right. Ed Skilling machine, which I have used and owned, and it's an absolutely marvelous device. It's here. We recommend highly that you look at it. The input coil, output coil. Ed knows exactly what he's doing. The Vitel, we're just about out of business here. By interrogating certain acupuncture points, as Roy Curtin mentioned yesterday, the computer will tell you, store in memory, what the body or the high self is trying to communicate. That's Kill This, The Body Electric, marvelous book by Dr. Robert O. Becker. And of course, An Absolute Cure for Cancer by Dr. Bjorn Nordenstrom, who puts electrodes into the cancer, and we're going to make it in 1 minute. The apparatus he uses in Sweden, you can do this in absentia with 2 9-volt transistor batteries, a couple of needles, and an electrode. You can cure cancer. Now, one of the most fascinating devices that I've come across is covered in this patent, a device which restores brain tissue, nerve, and neuronal tissue, which will never be seen because it will wreck Social Security, it will totally wreck pension and retirement funds, but there are patents on these.
What's the number on that?
Pardon me?
What was the number on that?
All right, here we go. I don't want to, I'll give it to you later. We're out of tape and out of time here. Device which, this is Dr. Meg Patterson and Crusader Rabbit. We developed an updated model of the Brain Tuner, which works far better than the $7,000 British one. We sell them for $200. They go in your shirt pocket. They're guaranteed to work. Some of the spectral analysis of the 256 frequencies involved in the device in each 1,000th of a second. A number of people here at the conference have these. And of course the Puharich watch. The jury is still out, but we're trying to see what it actually does. Do we have any tape left? How'd we do it?
About a minute maybe.
2 hours and 15 minutes in 44 minutes because we started late. The point is that electronic medicine is here to stay, both in the actuality of putting electricity into the system, seeing what the system says by taking a response on the acupuncture points, or by doing it entirely in your mind, high self to consciousness, back to the body where the immune system, like the sleeping giant, is awakened and can handle almost anything that could possibly come up, as long as you wake it up, show it the archetype of what you want, whether that is a number of rates on an instrument, the chemistry in a homeopathic sample, the waveforms that are folded into devices such as the Brain Tuner, the ElectroAcustim, a number of devices which cost a great deal of money and some that don't cost anything at all. So I wish we had time for questions, but we don't want to cut into the... Okay, he says we have another couple of seconds here. Probably the best thing that I've done in the last 20 years is the 5 months research we put into this little box, which puts the healing frequencies amplified from a 9-volt transistor radio battery that lasts a couple of months before you have to replace it. But the problem with many of these devices is that they go in the teeth of the big money. Valium and Librium are $13.6 billion a year alone. These things in a few days will get you off Valium and Librium by stimulating the body to produce its own indigenous neurotransmitters such as beta endorphin. The system cannot tolerate devices which will heal old people, for example, put them back on the labor market when the labor market is not absorbing the young folk who don't have a job. They would rather that some of us simply died to make room for those who are coming on. We had our 5 billionth citizen a week ago. Okay, we're out of tape? All right. So I guess we don't have time for questions. Thank you for